2 weeks ago, when I was last on this end of our family, I invited us to reflect upon where our parishes have been through the external changes, structures, and leadership changes within our parish family. And then I noted even more important were the internal, cultural, and spiritual changes that we need to go through. Catholic flourishing requires a renewal of our inner life of faith. And so I noted how we've already been trying to do that, especially living out the archdiocesan vision of one church, encountering Jesus, equipping disciples, living mercy. And our challenge is to continue to grow upon that so we become missional parishes. And so to facilitate that inner growth of life, I talked last time about a new initiative of prayer and evangelization that we have started in our parish family called Ignite. In fact, we had our first Ignite workshop earlier this morning. In it, we were looking particularly at continued growth in prayer and evangelization, looking at 4 habits of relational prayer. But future workshops that will be coming up, the next one will be in the spring, will go into topics around prayer, such as helping you to discern God's voice in prayer, how to recognize our unique gifts or charisms that God gives to us in service of others, evangelization topics, including things like practical skills and how we share the gospel, especially in relation to my own story, the way that God has impacted me in my own life. So those will be coming up in future workshops, and we'll let you know about those coming up. But we also recognized in our kind of Ignite program that we can't just think and talk about prayer just twice a year, in the fall and in the spring. We kind of do that a lot in the church, where we give our two seasons of Advent and Lent, where we really focus on prayer. But that's to enhance what our prayer ought to be the rest of the year. You know, if we just go back to normal life after those seasons, then we shouldn't really be surprised if nothing happens or changes in our relationship with the Lord. We must constantly continue to walk with the Lord. And that is where the second part of our Ignite program, Sunday Sparks, comes in. I mentioned a little bit about it last time, but I want to go into a little bit more details, since tonight is actually the first opportunity to participate in Sunday Sparks, right after Mass. We call it Sunday Sparks because it is happening before the Saturday and Sunday, or after the Saturday and Sunday Masses every other weekend. So one week I'll be on the other end of parishes, one week I'll be on this end. So it's kind of twice a month opportunity for us. So after Mass today, you're invited, if you would like to, come downstairs. We're going to start it downstairs to see how many people are interested. If we overfill it downstairs, we can always move over to the hall for future ones. Basically, it will be, I will give a talk on some aspect of prayer for 10 minutes. And if you want to stay a little bit longer and engage in discussion with one another, which is kind of why it's a little bit different from just listening to a homily. Because you hear a homily up here in the church, and then the rest of the Mass keeps going, and by the time you get done, you might have forgotten what I said. And you don't really have a chance to talk to each other about it and really, how is this going to impact my life? So doing it kind of in a more informal session downstairs can kind of help facilitate, let's talk to each other about, what is prayer like for us based upon the topic that I'll present on. And it's not so much that, I have any kind of special knowledge personally about prayer that makes me better than anybody else. No, I struggle just as much with prayer as anybody. But it really comes from my priestly heart that desires to introduce you in a deeper way to the spiritual traditions of the church, especially the wisdom of the saints. With regard to prayer, there are experts in how to pray, and it's helped me so much drawing from them. I want to be able to share that more and more with you. The Sparks are really designed to give you really short, practical bits of wisdom to apply practically in that coming week or so of your own personal prayer. If you struggle like prayer, like I do at times, if you wonder, how do I make a more personal connection to God in prayer? Sometimes you might feel like he's far away. How do I navigate the ups and downs of the spiritual life? How do I recognize God's voice in prayer? How do I know that that's really God that's speaking to me? How do I deal with distractions in the midst of my prayer? If any of those things sounds like, that would be helpful for me in my prayer life. Sparks can be a source of continual heat to our flame, to like bellows that get those sparks flying, those embers in the fire, to help us remain more consistent in our prayer. Sunday Sparks will give us a language of which to think and to talk to one another about prayer and provide those opportunities for that kind of fellowship and support as we strive to grow in greater relationship with the Lord. Now, I know some of us hearing all that, might have a little bit of hesitancy, like, well, that's an ongoing thing, Father, every other, you sure it's got lots of other things that I have to do. And I know that there can also be a fatigue for people about being asked to participate in so many different things, whether it's parish things, school things, community things. There's so much going on in our family lives. Not another thing, Father, for you to propose. And I understand. And maybe the case is we don't really need it. Maybe we already pray really, really well. But maybe on the other hand, we've fallen into the trap at times of doing so many good things that we've never really stopped to ask, God, do you want me to do this all? Is every single thing that I'm doing your will in my life? Jesus, he told one faithful woman this. He said, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and worried about many things. There is need of only one thing. There's need of only one thing. That one thing is to sit at the feet of Jesus, like Martha's sister Mary did. When everything seems to be so hectic in our lives that everything seems to be going wrong, there's only one thing that is wrong. You miss the Lord. You miss the Lord. See, the church teaches us that there's two main sources of God's grace. That is prayer and the sacraments. The two main ways in which we meet God. Sacraments and the prayer. And the last few years, we've really been, as a church, focusing on the sacraments, in particular the Eucharist, through our Eucharistic revival, National Eucharistic Revival. And so it would make sense that our next step would now be to concentrate upon personal prayer as that second half of how we meet God in our lives. In fact, it's really providential that we're beginning Sunday Sparks during this year of 2024 because earlier this year, Pope Francis declared 2024 to be a year of prayer. Every so often the Pope declares certain years to be years of things. So this is actually a year of prayer. It's in preparation for 2025, which is a Jubilee year that the church celebrates often, every 25 years. The last one was in 2000. So months ago, Pope Francis said that 2024 should be, he says, a year dedicated to rediscovering the great value and absolute need for prayer in one's personal life, in the life of the church, and in the world. So here what he says there. The absolute need for prayer in one's personal life. Earlier this month, we had the feast of St. John Chrysostom, an early church father who spoke very simply and eloquently. And he, to follow Pope Francis' words, said it this way. He said, as moisture is necessary to the life of plants to prevent them from drying up, is prayer necessary for our salvation. As moisture is necessary to the life of plants. Farmers, you know this better than anybody else, right? We need that moisture. Think about what's your ideal amount. I've heard many farmers say, well, we want that inch a week of moisture during the whole growing season so that we can our crops will continue to grow. Otherwise, they'll dry up. We don't want just sporadic bunch of rain here or there. We want that constant week after week after week so that it can be consistent in our crop's growth. Otherwise, it's going to dry up. Well, St. John Chrysostom says that our prayer is like that too. That as moisture is necessary to the life of plants to prevent them from drying up, so is prayer necessary for our salvation. So we should ask, well, what does my prayer look like? Are we getting that inch of prayer a week? consistently in our life? Are we constantly going to the Lord each day in prayer? Or is my prayer sometimes rather sporadic, or maybe some weeks it's rather non-existent at all? If we know that our crops will dry up without the needed moisture, then what about our souls? If it feels like we're drying up, if it feels like we're dying under the pressures of our hectic and complex lives, then perhaps it's because our souls are starved for that rain of prayer. And while we can't really do anything to make it rain on our crops, we're completely dependent upon God for that, we can actually participate and do something about whether or not we're watering our souls with prayer. Today's readings, in particular, they make reference to the disquiet that we often find within. Sometimes it comes from what other people do or say to us, like we heard in the first reading. Sometimes it comes from our own passions and thoughts and desires that go on within, like St. Paul talks about in the second reading. But it's precisely when we have those inner experiences, when we don't feel like praying, when it's hard to pray, when, in a sense, our inner fields dry up, that's when we need the Lord the most. Consistency and perseverance in prayer, to be faithful even when we're tired or overwhelmed or overworked, or we feel like nothing's happening when we pray, or maybe whether or not God is really listening to us at all. Remaining consistent in our prayer is a hard thing to do. We go through ups and downs. Some days it's easy to pray, and other days it might feel like it's impossible. So to help us with our consistency, that's why the Sunday Sparks are designed the way that they are. As short, consistent, ongoing opportunities to be able to gather, to talk, and learn more about prayer, to support each other in our consistent personal prayer outside of it. So, making Sunday Sparks, after any of the Masses that you attend in our family, you'll find it after any of them for that short period of time, really close by when you're already here in the church. It's about as simple and easy and convenient as we can possibly make it, unless we, of course, do nothing at all. Of course, if you're dissatisfied with our prayer life, if we do nothing at all, then nothing will change. So I want to make it clear that nobody's required to participate in the Sunday Sparks. I'm not trying to guilt anybody into staying after Mass and participating in it if you don't want to. But really, the way that I see it is, I want it to be a gift from your priest to you, who's had the opportunity to be formed in prayer through my own time of growth in the seminary. I want to be able to share that with you, to help you with the one thing that's necessary in our life, as Jesus says. Pope Francis says we need prayer. St. John Chrysostom says we need it. Jesus says we need it. I know that I need it. If only I were better at it and more faithful to it. If you want to try something different, if you want help in making that one thing necessary a more consistent part of your life, then consider joining me